So what really did you learn in your first season, and are you happy with what you achieved?
Well, it was a difficult one to almost sum up, really, wasn't it? Because it was that crazy and different for everybody. I think that first and foremost, I think one of the things that needed to be done was to try and sort of reduce the average age of the squad for lots of reasons, really. Very thankful and appreciative of the work that was done over the 3 years of success that the club had, but ultimately there was a lot of players that were certainly coming to a point in their career where to take the club to the next level probably had to move on. So I think we've achieved that in the short space of time that we've been here in terms of the average age of the squad. I think that the type of players that we were going to bring in as well, I think to compete at this level had to be a little bit different. January was a bit of a risk on our part. It was a calculated risk, but it was looking back now a risk worth taking. Some of the business that we did in January, because of what's happened with COVID, certainly stood us in good stead. I think you look at the couple of players that we've brought in so far, in terms of James and Lewis, I think they're quite exciting. So happy to a degree with how things went. I think it was only going to get better, if I'm being honest. I think after the initial little bit of a spike in January that you sometimes get when new players are coming into the building, we had a bit of a period where the results didn't go for us. Performances were still okay. But then obviously the last couple of results were really, really promising, and performance levels went up again. And we were looking forward to the Tranmere game, really, because we just felt that was one of them where if we won the game, we would have started really looking ahead of us rather than what's going on behind us.
Yeah, and taking it back further than that, right when you first came in, it didn't turn around straight away. You had 2 wins in 11 games. And at the time you were saying the performances would eventually get the results that they deserved. What was it exactly that did eventually lead to that when you had a really good period in December and January?
Just timing. It's like anything you do, you need time, and players need time to develop. The style was very, very different. I asked them to change a lot of things very, very quickly. In an ideal world, you'd have an opportunity through pre-season to change things and do it over a period of time where we never really had that. So there was a lot that was asked of the players, and I was mindful of that. And at first, we just literally been talking about it there. Sometimes when you've got a group of players and a new group of players, you have to find a way of winning close games to give them the belief to go on and perform at a high level. And that will be the case when the season restarts. We'll have obviously a younger group, more athletic, full of endeavour and enthusiasm and energy, but ultimately they need to pass different tests. And I think the type of tests that you need to pass are those where you're in tight games and against difficult teams and you come out victors. So again, I think if you give quality a bit of time, eventually it will flourish.
Yeah, and in January, one of the things that happened was you lost Walker and Kinde, but you brought in John Jules, Scully and Hopper. Obviously, Tyrese then got injured, and you were pretty much left with Hopper as the only out-and-out striker. What did you feel at that time, given that you had said you wanted 4?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? It's one of them. That's part of the process that can happen as a manager, and it's like anything. If I moan about it, I get called and slagged off that I'm making excuses and this and that. You just got to get on with it, and that's why it's important to have a squad and have quality and have 3 or 4 potential options in different positions. you know, we never made a big deal of it at all. But yes, John left. You know, to lose Tyler as late as we did in January, you know, to most people, they would have made a really, really big thing about that. You know, ultimately, he was our top goal scorer. He scored goals for fun. And to try and replace the likes of Tyler in such a short space of time was difficult. So when we brought Tyrese in, it softened the blow slightly. But like you say, when he picked up his injury, it become a little bit more difficult. But you just got to find a way of dealing with it. And I think what we did was, you know, we used different players to try and get a combination going with Tom. You know, Jake played in behind him a few times. Young and Scully did it. You know, we did think about possibly at times putting George Grant in there as almost a number 10 to give us a bit of balance, but we felt like he was doing that well in the wide area, especially on that left-hand side. We didn't do too much for that. So I think what we did was we just coped. We coped as best we could. But the good thing is about obviously where we're at now, doesn't matter how small or big your budget is, you know, you've still got an opportunity to get a group of players who, you know, are comfortable in various positions.
Yeah, and you had brought a lot of players in January, and just as maybe you were hitting form with Burton games, everything just shut down. You had a few players which hadn't featured since they were brought in. What were your plans for them, and would they have been more if COVID hadn't happened?
Yeah, I think a lot of them would have featured a lot more. You know, one of them, probably a good example of that is Zach. Obviously, Zach come in. People have not really known him before. They've seen clips on YouTube, and they've seen him maybe, you know, bits and pieces in the Irish team. But you know, he had a couple of little fleeting appearances. He played the first half at Southend, which was probably one of our poorest performances of the season. So he was part of that group, and it took him probably a few weeks to get over that because he knew personally, you know, he didn't really perform anywhere near what he is capable of. But what I would say is, and this is why it was a little bit frustrating to finish when we did, was, you know, in training he was really, really coming into his own, and you know, you can tell when someone's coming to their own and making a bit of an impact because the players were talking about it. You know, his performance levels in training were outstanding, and you know, staff, players were all discussing it. So I do believe that he would have had a massive impact towards the end of the season. You've only got to look at players like TJ, who obviously, you know, we took him from Spurs and no minutes. He's on the bench a couple of times. Again, you know, if I felt that we would have got to a point, Sally, that we would have been capable with, and it might have just been one or two more games after the Burton one, then you would have seen the likes of TJ and Zach coming to the side.
I suppose that is a good point to lead on to next season. Is that going to be a big part of your plans?
What's that?
Zach. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean he's one of, I suppose, depending where you pitch schools, you know, he's one of 3 or 4 players who are going to be potentially fighting out for them wider positions. You know, you've got Harry Anderson, who's obviously, you know, been a little bit more adaptable recently, or certainly since when I come in. Obviously, George Grant did ever so well for us, and Anthony Scully can play left side, right side of the 10. But I'm sure in Zach's mind, or I'd like to think in Zach's mind, that he's raring to go this year, and you know, some of the times that he's been posting, doing his own stuff in the off season, he's been breaking all sorts of records. So I'd like to see that in the flesh and see how we get on.
How long had you been training before, and how far are you to get finished?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, we'd seen a couple of videos of Lewis just before lockdown, and then obviously when we had the extended period off, it gave us a real opportunity to dig a little bit deeper. So, you know, myself and the rest of the staff watched numerous games and clips of him. Joe was working sort of socks off behind the scene when he didn't have to, and you know, doing extra bits for us. But then it gave us an opportunity to you know, ask a few questions to try and find out a little bit more about his character, people who work in Holland. So all the reports we got back on him that, you know, he was a humble lad, worked very, very hard, and you know, was desperate for an opportunity to play abroad, to play in Europe, and I think England was one of his preferred options. And you know, myself and Jez, you know, we did one of these calls with him. We did a presentation about the club and how we do things, and with the help of, like I say, people that we knew in Holland and the player's agent, we managed to get agreement in place.
And he's probably not one that a load of Lincoln fans have heard of before he came in, but he's been described as a ball-playing centre-half that would fit into the style of play you like to play that you saw come in during your time at the club. Is that something you're looking to carry on forward?
Yeah, no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt about it. You know, ultimately, first and foremost, don't get me wrong, you know, the reason that a centre-half is a centre-half is because he's there to stop goals and defend. You know, let's not be around the bush. You know, that's the first thing that's expected of them. But if they can deal with the ball and capable of dealing with the ball, then, you know, I'm delighted with that. I think first and foremost, you know, when you're looking at a young player, looking at his attributes, you know, it stands out. The obvious ones that stands out with Lewis is that he's a physical specimen. You know, he's 6'4", maybe 6'3", 6'4", but he's an absolute unit. You know, big, strong legs, big shoulders. You know, he's got a good pace. But the big bonus is, like I say, he's comfortable with both feet. He can play left side and right side. And you can tell when you look at him, he's got a hunger and desire in his eyes that he wants to come here and do well. So yeah, we like to think that, you know, over a period of time we've got an asset there that, you know, hopefully will do well for the football club.
And you've still got a few gaps in what I'm sure you'd like to add to a bit of depth. Your model since you've been in has very much been try and develop these players. Is that something you're going to look to carry on with your incoming players, and would you like to be more senior?
Both, yeah, both. There's no doubt about it. It's just getting that balance right. I think what you find is, especially this summer more than ever, I think if you're going to get the younger players in, there's a better opportunity to do that quite early. Because, you know, a lot of the younger players and less experienced players are desperate to get into a club before, let's say, pre-season starts. Whereas the more experienced players, they're a little bit more relaxed. They've been there, done it. They know how to get through a pre-season. They're aware that they can be a little bit more patient. Maybe they'll be slightly more impatient this year because of COVID and there's that many players out of contract. But yeah, I think the younger ones are a lot easier to do at this early stage. But, you know, we're aware that going forward, we need 2 or 3 more experienced players, and I'm sure that'll be the case before the window shuts.
And have you got any sort of specific positions you're looking for, or is that very much close to you?
No, I think we are. I think, you know, you probably don't need me to tell you what they are, because you look at the squad and there's certain areas of the squad that certainly needs filling, and, you know, we need numbers. I'd say between now and the start of the season, and this is not definitive, so I don't need to be quoted, but we're going to need at least another 5 or 6 players. You know, that's just numbers, making numbers sense at the minute as it stands at this moment in time. We're well short on our quota that we're going to need, and it's one of them as well. Don't forget, you know, if the season starts what we think it will be around the 12th of September, we know there's going to be a minimum of 11 midweek games, and that doesn't count for cup ties. You know, that's just the league games. So there's going to be a lot of football that's going to be played, and the players are going to be under a big demand to make sure they're ready for Saturday, Tuesday. So we need a balance of experienced players who can cope with that, but more importantly as well, some youth and energy.
We're seeing a few of the players from the youth academies contract.
Yeah.
Can we expect any of them to be on the pitch?
Well, I think obviously a lot's been made of Sean, and rightly so. And you know, he's had a lot of plaudits from the likes of Jez and the academy lads, and including myself as well. He came and trained with us a few times last season. You know, before we got locked down. But yes, you know, Sean is definitely the main one in terms of where he's at in his career. But there's 2 or 3 others who, when they came and trained with us last season, they looked the part, and that they didn't look massively out of place. You know, I don't want to mention too many, you know, because I will do. The likes of Ben Sol come in, and you know, he's not going to be one of the ones that people look at and stand out because he does anything weird and wonderful. But what Ben does do well is the simple things. He wins it and keeps it simple. And there's a lot to be said that, because these days, a lot of players, they want to do too much, and they want to show you the good players, and they do too much on the ball, where the likes of Salty just gets on the ball and plays. And you've got Ziad, who's a flying machine, who's, you know, if he continues to develop at the pace he did last season, again, he might be asking questions throughout the season. And these others, Sam in goal, you know, there's lots of the lads who we had a little bit of a look at last year, who over time, you know, they might get better and develop more. And, you know, if we're in competitions, and some of the cup competitions, a little bit longer than certainly we were last season, then you never know.
And then just sort of final question from me on your squad so far. Anything that you're confident in coming in? Obviously, you're not going to give their names, but are you confident a few more coming in soon, or have you got anything solid in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to, you know, our official start date for pre-season will be August the 3rd. You know, we've got a few sessions for players who want to do things voluntary in the meantime. But when we bring them all together as a group rather than small groups, voluntary groups, I'm hoping by the time that 3rd of August we'll have at least 2 more potentially in the building. So beyond that, like I've already said, we probably need 5 or 6 in total. So I won't want to leave it too much past the start date of the pre-season. But, you know, I'm also mindful, what I said earlier, that, you know, if we're going to get a couple of experienced players, we might need to be a little bit more patient.
We'll be working towards that August update.
Yeah, well, we've already got a plan in place in terms of myself and the medical staff, how we approach it. We've got a lot of friendly games that are penciled in, provisional. As soon as we get the absolute guarantee that it is the 12th start, obviously we can put them in place, and I'm sure you guys will be aware of them once we get them for definite. And then, like I say, in the meantime, the players know that if they, you know, want to do certain sessions, then they're aware of the type of sessions that we would like them to do before we come in on the 3rd.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, well, let's look at maybe how COVID has affected things. Fans are unlikely to be in the pretty much as soon as we start. And in the Premier League, we've seen how some teams like Sheffield United, they've had really good atmospheres all season, really good results to match that, and their form has slightly dipped but since COVID has happened. Is this a worry that this could happen to Lincoln, given that you've got really good home form and
so I'm going to guess that last bit, Aaron, because it went a little bit funny again. But no, I think you're right. I think there's it could work in the favour of a lot of clubs, and you're right. I think one of the biggest things about Lincoln City is the atmosphere that you can create at the stadium. I think it's just one of them where a lot of the messaging that we will say to the players is that the reality is that all the players have come through youth systems. They've all come through playing reserve team football and practice matches. And it's all about mindset. So whether you play 200 games and all of a sudden you're coming back from an injury or you've been out the side for a while, you're going to end up having to be playing in games where there's not many people around and almost behind closed doors. for me, it's a mindset of how you approach them games, and we've just got to make sure that come the 3rd of August, or if there's cup games before that our mindset is in the right place and we know exactly what we're doing, and it's our job as staff and sort of senior people at the club to make sure that that's the case.
How do you think fans could support the team really from not being in the ground? How can they do that?
Well, as I'm aware, I think obviously the I follow is one thing, because ultimately, and I don't know the ins and outs of this, so obviously Liam and Jez and all these guys will have a better position to talk about this, but obviously we're going to lose revenue by fans being in the stadium, if that's the case, or a third of the fans, or 50%, whatever they decide by the time we're back out playing. I heard something today about it might only be a third of fans by October instead of 50%, what they were thinking. Obviously I'm aware that there was a lot of season ticket sales that happened before COVID, and some of the stories that are coming back to me are incredible, where people are saying, we don't care, and we don't want refunds and this. I think it's incredible. It just sums up the football club as a whole and the community, and how much the football club means to people. The majority of the people who had season tickets last season and never had the opportunity to see the final 5 home games, and the goodwill and the gestures that they've done for the club as well, won't be forgotten. So they've already, in answer to your question, they've already shown fantastic support already. If they can do similar sort of things and similar sort of gestures before we are unable to sort of get back in the stadium, all them little things will be appreciative of all the players and all the staff, and will go a long way for when they actually can get back in.
Okay, Kieran?
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking, as we look towards next season, what are your aspirations, what are your plans for?
Well, I think the easy one to that is to, try and improve and be better, and try and finish higher than what we did this year. Regardless of anything, it was, and I did say it earlier doors, it was the first time the club had been at this level for 20, 21 years or whatever it was, and it was about making sure you establish yourself in the division and make sure we're competing in the division this year. We're going to be. It's a difficult one to answer, because we don't know where budget-wise we're going to stand in relation to everyone else that's in the league. I think first and foremost, I'll be delighted, and I said it a couple of times last season, if we're competing in the top half of the division. There's going to be 24 teams in the league this year, and if we're competing from number 12 upwards, it just gives us a really good base to kick on. Sign a 3.5 year deal. This is the first opportunity to get a first full season under my belt, and if we don't go up this year and don't get in the playoffs, would it be a disaster? Absolutely not. No, it depends on the development of the players that we have in the building. If we can have a really good season this year and be competitive the following season, if we kept the majority of those players in place, you'd never know. We might not be talking about playoffs. We might be talking about going up automatically.
And obviously the championship season concluded this week. As it stands, there's 3 big teams coming down: Hull, Charlton, Wigan, Boston. There's a few teams that can change their finish points. Do you see the league as stronger than last season? 3 teams that come down.
Yeah, and I don't want to be disrespectful to any teams that have gone up, and certainly teams that have come down, but I think people will find it hard to argue with me when I say I think the season, the league this year is much tougher, much tougher. I think it's going to be a much stronger league. The clubs that you've mentioned that are coming down from the championship, obviously, I know there's still a little bit of potential controversy that could happen with the likes of Derby and Sheffield Wednesday. But even the teams that are coming up, Plymouth, huge club, have a really good fan base. Swindon, similar. Crewe, in terms of, yes, they haven't got the fan base that some of the clubs might not have, but over the years they've always been known as being a really good football side, and a side that, similar to potentially what Lincoln hopefully will be in terms of developing young players and potentially selling them on. So, and then obviously to add to that, Northampton, not a million miles away, and we've seen how well they did in the playoffs and how difficult they're going to be as well. So there's no doubt about it. You've seen the likes of Sunderland and Ipswich miss out from going up this year. The quality of what Peterborough have got and the money that they tend to spend and can spend at this level, and Oxford, who probably, arguably, from a stats point of view, feel that they should be in the Championship this year, but unfortunately it hasn't happened.
Yeah, thank you.
Your away form wasn't great last season, but obviously with no fans being in the grounds at first, at least, do you think that could be an advantage in that there's no home advantage?
Potentially, who knows? I mean, it's not something I'm particularly worried about, because at previous clubs, ironically, my away form has been a hell of a lot better than my home form, so by a distance as well. So it's not something I worry or think about too much, if I'm being honest. I think ultimately you can get sort of lost and wrap yourself up in all sorts of knots worrying about that. I think you've got to get the performance right first. I think the more consistent performances you put in, eventually, results will match those performances. And I think over the season, I'm sure and hopeful at the same time that next season our away form will be much better than it was this year.
Is there anything else that you think you could improve on from last season?
Yeah, lots of things. It's one of them where I think in the final third, the amount of opportunities that we create, we have to score more goals for the amount of opportunities that we create, so our conversion rate can be better. Seeing moments out in the game, whether it's getting to half time and making sure that we get in there at the time that we want it to. Going ahead in games is going to be important. I think it doesn't matter what level of football you're at, and you've probably seen it with our results. Once we do go ahead, we tend to do quite well and not lose too many games. I think being brave enough to come back from behind, it happened a couple of times last year, and I think that was the big bonus from the Burton game just before the end of lockdown, to go behind twice in the game to still win it. That was huge for us, because I think it had only happened in my tenure so far where, I think it was Peterborough, the only game where we went behind and won. So you could tell me differently, but that's the only one I can remember other than the Burton game. So for them to psychologically get over that barrier of like, listen, it doesn't matter if you can see the first goal, we've still got the strength of character to deal with it. So you can always improve, keep more clean sheets, all these type of stuff. We'll look at everything and dissect everything as much as we need to, but ultimately it'll be about what we do on the training field.